Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm not the loud one in the family. I'm the daughter who showed up, stayed quiet, did the right thing until the day I found out silence cost me everything. This story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when love comes with conditions, and what you do when the people meant to protect you choose someone else. Have you ever felt erased by your own family? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is speak. I parked a few houses down from Mom's place. Not because parking was tight, it rarely was on Queen Anne Hill, but because I needed a few extra seconds of silence. Lauren had offered to drive together, but I told her I'd meet her there. I wasn't ready to share the inside of a car with anyone just yet. The snow had started falling earlier that morning, soft and slow like powdered sugar dusted over rooftops. It made everything look prettier than it felt. Inside, the house smelled exactly as it always had: lavender cleaner, citrus polish, and the faintest trace of something floral Mom never admitted to wearing. The dining table was already set. Quiche rested under a glass dome, and 3 delicate plates were laid out on a crisp white cloth. China, not the everyday stuff. Berry preserves sat in a ceramic bowl shaped like a winter pear. Sliced oranges were fanned out on a platter with sprigs of mint. Mom always liked brunch to feel like an occasion. Lauren was already seated when I walked in, her mouth drawn tight. She gave me a look that said, "You owe me for not warning me." Michael stood by the fireplace, hands folded behind his back, like he was waiting to give a toast. He smiled when he saw me. It was warm, but worn. "Rachel," he said, "happy Sunday." "Sure," I replied, taking off my coat. The fire crackled behind him, but it gave off no heat. Mom appeared from the kitchen with a teapot in one hand and her expression perfectly arranged. "Glad everyone could make it," she said, placing the pot on the table. "Let's sit. We have things to discuss." No one asked what things. We'd been summoned. The estate attorney was a man in a gray wool suit with a face like a sealed envelope. He nodded politely but didn't speak. Mom introduced him as Mr. Talbot, then proceeded to pour mint tea like she hadn't just promised a legal discussion. As we began eating, she tapped her spoon lightly against her cup. "I've been thinking," she began. "It's time we handle the estate planning formally. No sense leaving things undone. Dad had always said we'd split everything equally. No surprises." He used that phrase all the time, especially when Mom went off script. But Dad had been gone for 6 years, and the script was now hers. Michael set his cup down. "You mean your will?" "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "And the house. It's time we put things in writing." The room went still. Lauren's fork hovered above her plate, unmoving. Mom gestured to the attorney. "Mr. Talbot will explain." He cleared his throat. "Per Mrs. Everett's instructions, the family home will be transferred, upon her passing, to Dr. Michael Everett." I blinked. Lauren set her fork down too hard. It clinked against the plate. Mom didn't flinch. "The girls," Mr. Talbot continued, "will receive a portion of the savings account, select bonds, and personal items of sentimental value." I felt a slow warmth rise behind my ears. Not anger yet, just the kind of burn that says, "Wait, did I hear that right?" "Wait," I said, my voice small. "Just to clarify, the house goes to Michael?" Mom nodded. "Of course, he's the eldest. This is how things are traditionally done." "And what about Dad's wishes?" I asked. "He wanted peace," she replied. "And this is what brings peace." Michael shifted in his seat. He looked as if he might speak, but then thought better of it. Lauren leaned forward. "You do realize he's already a millionaire, right?" Mom poured herself another cup of tea. "He's earned it. He's worked hard for his reputation." I stared at the floral pattern on my plate, gooseberries and violets. "We've worked too," I said, more to myself than to her. She looked at me then, her eyes soft but her mouth firm. "And I love you girls. This isn't about favoritism. It's about logic, stability, continuity." It sounded like she was reading from a press release. Silence swelled around us like a second layer of snow. And yet, I knew, deep down, we weren't meant to argue. Not here, not now. This wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. Mom stood. "I hope you understand. This decision brings clarity." Lauren didn't respond. She reached for the preserves and smeared a thin layer onto her toast. Her hands shook slightly. I looked out the window. The snow was still falling, thicker now. The neighbors' pine trees were coated in white. Everything looked calm, clean, but inside, something had shifted. Mom resumed small talk, commenting on the tea blend and the latest art exhibit at the museum downtown. Michael answered politely, though his voice was quieter than usual. I went through the motions, nodding, sipping tea that tasted like mint and something bitter beneath. When brunch ended, we hugged Mom goodbye, the kind of hug you give out of muscle memory. Outside, Lauren pulled her coat tight and walked ahead of me toward her car. I stayed behind for a moment, staring up at the house. The windows looked back at me like eyes. I had memories in those walls. Birthday candles. My first heartbreak, sitting on the back stairs with Dad, eating ice cream out of the carton. And now it wasn't mine, not even in theory. I whispered to myself, so this is what erasure tastes like. Berry jam and betrayal. When I got home, I pulled out an old leather journal I hadn't touched in years. It was tucked in the back of a bookshelf, behind a stack of old essays I never graded. I opened to the first blank page and wrote, December 2nd, 2018. Today I watched my mother give my brother a house, and my sister silence. She gave me a lesson. I just haven't figured out what it is yet. The rain had been steady all afternoon. Not dramatic, just persistent, like it had something to prove. It tapped against my apartment windows like a polite guest who refused to leave. I had lit a lavender candle an hour ago, mostly out of habit, partly to cut the dampness curling into my bones. Lauren arrived holding a plastic folder tucked under her arm, her coat soaked at the edges. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just shook off the rain at the door and walked in like she owned the place, which in a way she always had. I went through Dad's old cabinet, she said, dropping the folder on my kitchen table. You remember the one in the garage, with the broken drawer? I nodded, setting 2 mugs on the counter. The one he used as a desk/toolbox/treasure chest? She half smiled. Yeah, that one. We sat without music, only the rain and the occasional groan from the old floorboards beneath us. I poured tea, chamomile, not because it helped, but because it made me feel like I was doing something. Lauren opened the folder and pulled out a small black flash drive. It was unmarked except for a faded label in Dad's handwriting. Property. Shared. My stomach twisted. She placed it between us like it was made of glass. I almost didn't bring it over, thought maybe it was just old receipts or stuff from his workdays. But you looked, I said. She nodded. Yeah, and you need to see this. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up with a list of folders, labeled in Dad's usual style. Everett Trust, Assets Review, House Appraisal, 2014, Michael Titles. Lauren leaned in as I opened one marked Transfers. There were PDFs, spreadsheets, scanned letters. Everything time-stamped, organized. Too clean. I clicked through the files and it started to unravel. Properties, multiple ones. Some in our neighborhood, others in Arizona, California, even a small rental in Vermont. Then came the stock documents, blocks of shares quietly moved under Michael's name. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Lauren tapped a document. Look, that signature? That's Michael's, and that's Mom's handwriting. The more we clicked, the heavier it got. Over $6 million. Moved, hidden, renamed. All into Michael's accounts over the last 9 years. No mention of us, not once. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it was mocking me. She did this after Dad died, Lauren whispered. Started almost exactly 3 months later. I couldn't speak. She didn't just pick him, Lauren continued. She erased us. It wasn't anger yet, not the kind that explodes. This was colder, measured. Like my body was cataloging pain before deciding how to feel it. I kept thinking maybe we just weren't impressive enough, I said slowly. Like if we were flashier, louder, more visible. Lauren looked at me, her jaw clenched. You're a teacher who's saved more kids than Mom's charity checks ever could. I work with abused teens who call me at midnight because I'm the only adult they trust. That should count. I looked back at the flash drive, still plugged in, humming faintly. It doesn't, I said. Not to her. Lauren was quiet for a beat. Then, we've been props in a story she never let us write. The room felt too small. The candle flickered in the draft. I reached out and removed the flash drive. Its plastic felt warm, familiar, in a way that made my skin crawl. We need to see someone, I said. A real someone. Lauren raised an eyebrow. You mean, like a lawyer? Yes, I said. Someone who doesn't call betrayal tradition. The rain picked up outside, smattering against the windows harder now, as if agreeing with us. I glanced over at the bookshelf where Dad's framed photo still sat. He was smiling in that lopsided way, one arm around each of us at some long-ago birthday party. He had always promised things would be fair. Fairness didn't live here anymore. And neither, I was beginning to realize, did we. The waiting room smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. Justice, apparently, had no perfume. Lauren and I sat side by side, flipping through outdated magazines we weren't reading. Across from us, a ficus plant wilted in a terracotta pot that had seen better decades. There were framed quotes on the wall. One said, "Truth doesn't tremble in court." Another said, "Silence is not a virtue when your legacy's on trial." Claudia Vargas's law office wasn't grand, but it was intentional. Minimalist in the way you knew every object had earned its right to exist there. A thick gray rug absorbed our nervous shifting. The receptionist offered water and returned with thick glass tumblers, not plastic bottles. It felt sturdy, like we needed to match its tone before entering. Lauren tapped her foot as if trying to shake loose the weight of the flash drive still sitting in her bag. I looked at her, then looked away. I was trying to summon my father's voice in my head. He had once told me years ago, if someone hurts you quietly, you don't owe them quiet in return. I'd laughed when he said it. I thought he meant breakups. Turns out, he meant this. We were called in 10 minutes later. Claudia Vargas stood to greet us. No-nonsense black blazer, sleeves rolled once at the cuff. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled into a low bun. No rings, no apologies in her handshake. "Ms. Everett," she said to me. And "Ms. Everett," to Lauren. A flicker of a grin. "Please, sit." Her office was small but not cramped. Clean lines, shelves of legal volumes in navy and cream. On the desk sat a ceramic tray with 2 small stones that read "Balance" and "Resolve." I didn't know if it was ironic or sincere. Maybe both. I handed her the flash drive. Lauren passed over a printed folder of notes she'd compiled. Claudia slipped on reading glasses, clicked the drive into her laptop, and opened the first file. For the next 15 minutes, she didn't speak. Just scrolled, clicked, skimmed, underlined. Her lips formed a near imperceptible line as she opened spreadsheet after spreadsheet, scanned signature after signature. Lauren sat with her arms crossed, eyes sharp. I held my breath more than once. When Claudia finally spoke, it was as though she'd been writing the words in her head the entire time. "Well," she said, "this isn't subtle." We waited. "You've got clear, continuous financial transfers, structured, deliberate, masked in layered trusts and family holdings. And yes, your brother's name is on at least 8 primary documents, which means he's complicit, at minimum." I blinked. "So, we're not crazy." She looked up. "Number. But you might be naive if you think this won't get ugly." Lauren leaned forward. "We're ready." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "You're angry. That's different." I spoke then, voice steadier than I expected. "What are our options?" She outlined them quickly, contesting the will based on historical financial disparity, breach of fiduciary expectation, potential undue influence. She said the phrase constructive fraud like it was a scalpel. "It won't be fast," she added. "You'll need to file formal intent. There will be deposition subpoenas, possible media exposure if anyone leaks details." Lauren shrugged. "Let them leak." Claudia turned to me. "Rachel?" I met her gaze. Family was fractured the moment she signed us away. She studied me for a beat, then nodded. "Then let's break the silence." I exhaled, slower than necessary. Claudia stood and walked to a small cabinet, pulling out a packet labeled Initial Action Strategy, Family Estate Dispute. She handed it to me, then another to Lauren. "You'll need to gather everything, emails, letters, photos of documents, anything your father might have said about his wishes. He's gone, so he can't testify. But paper speaks loud." Lauren nodded. I'll go back through the garage bins. Emotionally, Claudia added, this will cut deeper than you think. You'll second-guess yourselves. People will choose sides. Mom already did, I said. There was nothing smug in Claudia's face, just a kind of knowing fatigue. She'll likely send letters, she said. Or try guilt. Maybe silence. Just remember, fairness isn't a mood. It's measurable. I tucked the packet into my bag. We stood to leave. Claudia shook our hands again, firm, grounded. At the door, she paused. You're not doing this for money. You're doing it for truth. Don't forget that when things get murky. Outside, the clouds had split just enough for a patch of sun to cast gold across the hood of my car. Lauren opened the passenger door, then stopped. You okay? Ask me in a year. When I got home, there was a voicemail blinking on my phone. Michael's number. I stared at it for a while. I didn't want to hear regret from someone who didn't stop the harm. I deleted it without listening. Not because I was cold, because sometimes peace starts with turning down the volume. Michael looked like a man who'd memorized every defense, except the one that mattered. Remorse. He walked into the conference room with the slow, deliberate steps of someone trying to seem smaller than his title. Gone was the polished version of him we'd seen in magazines or Mom's endless photo frames. This Michael had shadows under his eyes and a loosened tie like it was choking him in real time. The room itself was indifferent. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that flickered just enough to unsettle. A long rectangular table with untouched pitchers of water at both ends. No windows, no softness, just edges and echoes. Claudia greeted him formally. Her tone was crisp but not aggressive. Opposing counsel, a younger man with perfect hair and a carefully unreadable face, gave the kind of nod that seemed rehearsed. Lauren and I sat on one side of the table, Claudia beside me. Lauren hadn't said a word since we arrived. She kept her eyes on the notepad in front of her, though I wasn't sure she was writing anything. The deposition began with procedural questions: name, profession, affiliations. Michael answered like a surgeon dictating patient notes, efficient, emotionless. Then Claudia leaned in. Dr. Everett, can you walk us through the financial transfers initiated between 2014 and 2019 involving properties listed under your name? Michael looked down. Some of them were our investment properties. Mom said it was easier for tax purposes. Claudia didn't flinch. Were you aware your sisters were not informed of these transfers? He hesitated. At first I thought they knew. I didn't ask. And the signatures? Yours. On at least 8 of those documents? I signed them. Did you read them? Another pause. Not all. I trusted Mom. My chest felt tight. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just exhausted. Claudia opened a file, sliding it across the table toward him. This one, for example. Transferring a jointly held trust established by your father, states full ownership under your name. Your signature appears on the final page. Were you aware the trust was originally created for all 3 siblings? Michael's voice dropped. She told me it was a temporary measure, that she'd sort it out later. Claudia didn't respond. She turned a page. I looked at him, really looked. This was the brother who once took the blame when I shattered Mom's favorite vase. That's what big brothers are for, he'd said, handing over the broken pieces like an offering. But this wasn't childhood. This wasn't glue and forgiveness. You knew what Dad wanted, I said finally. Michael's eyes lifted. I didn't think it would go this far. You let it, I said. He looked at the file again, then at me. And for the first time, something shifted in his face. The armor cracked. A flicker of the boy I used to know surfaced, brief and unguarded. I didn't want the crown, he said softly. But I wore it anyway. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, heavy. Claudia marked something on her legal pad, then closed the file slowly. That's enough, she said. The opposing counsel cleared his throat but didn't object. Michael didn't look at him. The deposition ended with signatures and acknowledgments. No one offered small talk. We stood, gathered our things. Michael lingered a second longer before stepping toward the door. I didn't know how to stop it, he said quietly, not quite looking at me. You could have tried, I replied. Outside the room, the hallway felt colder somehow. Lauren and I walked side by side to the elevator. She still hadn't spoken. It wasn't until we were on the sidewalk, the sound of traffic buzzing past, that she said, "He's not evil." I waited. "He's just weak," she finished. I nodded. "And that's sometimes worse." Back home, I tossed my coat on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed without bothering to kick off my shoes. I replayed his voice in my head, over and over. I didn't want the crown, but he never returned it either. That night, I opened my journal again. The lavender candle flickered beside me as I wrote. July 14th, 2020. Today, I saw what shame looks like when it forgets how to ask for forgiveness. I'm not angry because he took. I'm angry because he watched us give and said nothing. Outside, the city carried on. Horns, sirens, laughter in the distance. Life didn't pause for our pain. But mine had taken on its own momentum now. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about not disappearing quietly. We weren't waiting to win. We were waiting to be believed. I don't remember what I wore that morning, just that it was dark and didn't wrinkle easily. Lauren said I should wear something that made me feel grounded. All I knew was that nothing in my closet had ever prepared me to walk into a courtroom against our own mother. The King County Courthouse was solemn, all marble and hush. It didn't feel like a place for resolution. It felt like a place for endings. The courtroom itself was colder than I expected, physically and otherwise. High ceilings, thin carpet, fluorescent lights that gave the polished wood a sterile sheen. I remember the subtle echo of every footstep and the faint scent of lemon cleaner, like someone had tried to erase whatever came before us. Lauren and I sat behind Claudia at the left table. She had her legal pad open, 3 colored tabs on the top page. Her glasses perched low on her nose as she whispered strategy to a junior associate we hadn't met before. Across the aisle sat Evelyn. She was stone in a suit. Hair set, makeup flawless, back impossibly straight. The antique silver leaf brooch she wore on her collar caught the light every time she moved. I used to think that brooch was beautiful. Today it looked like a blade. Michael sat next to her, but not close enough to touch. His eyes were fixed on the floor. He didn't fidget this time, but the effort it took to stay still was etched all over his face. People began to file in behind us. Strangers, some family friends, a few from Mom's charity board. I saw one of Dad's old colleagues 2 rows back. He gave me a sad nod. I didn't return it. Then the bailiff stood. "All rise." Judge Miriam Sloan entered briskly, her presence as commanding as her reputation promised. She adjusted her robes, glanced at her stack of papers, and began reading. Her voice was even, measured, no frills. "This court has reviewed the testimony, evidence, and supporting documentation regarding the estate of David Everett and the subsequent will authored by Evelyn Everett. Findings show extensive undocumented transfers of significant financial assets, including, but not limited to, real estate, bonds, and equity holdings, into the name of Dr. Michael Everett, without disclosure to the other beneficiaries." Her words were paper-cut sharp. She continued, "The timeline of these transactions, aligned with the passing of Mr. Everett and without transparent communication to the family, constitutes a pattern of unilateral financial reallocation." Claudia sat still as stone. Lauren squeezed my hand under the table. I wasn't breathing. Judge Sloan looked up briefly, then resumed. "It is the conclusion of this court that the current will presented is invalid due to a lack of equitable intent and an established history of financial favoritism inconsistent with the verbal assurances of the deceased." And just like that, everything changed. The will was thrown out. The estate, house, investments, savings, even Mom's hidden accounts, was to be legally frozen, reviewed, and redistributed equally among the 3 of us. Michael, Lauren, and me. We hadn't just cracked open the past. We'd reset the present. I looked at Michael. For a moment, his shoulders lifted like he might say something. But he didn't. Judge Sloan wasn't finished. "This court also recognizes the plaintiff's claim of emotional and psychological distress caused by exclusion from familial legacy and honors their request for restitution. A partial award will be granted for damages, not for financial loss, but for the validation of grief." She paused then, letting the weight of it land. "And finally," she said, her voice softening just slightly, "this court acknowledges that inheritance should not be a reward for obedience." The gavel fell like a bell. The courtroom exhaled, but I didn't. Not yet. Mom stood slowly. Her face remained calm, but her eyes had gone glassy, hard, reflective, distant. She gathered her purse, adjusted the sleeve of her coat with the same elegance she used to frost birthday cakes. Then she walked out. She didn't look at us. Not even once. And God help me, I didn't look at her either. Outside, the sky had turned the kind of pale blue that makes autumn feel like memory. The leaves on the courthouse steps were crisp underfoot, their colors already starting to dull. Lauren stood beside me, arms crossed, looking somewhere I couldn't see. She really thought we'd fold, she whispered. She still does, I replied. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then I reached down, picked up a single maple leaf, bright, red, veined like a secret, and held it between my fingers. I thought about Dad. I thought about the notebook he kept by his bed, the one Lauren and I had finally opened last month. His last journal entry said this: I hope Evelyn remembers that love isn't about hierarchy. It's about presence, about showing up. I let the leaf go. The wind took it quickly, without fuss. It fluttered once, then rose, then vanished behind a parked car. Lauren turned to me. Why don't I feel better? I smiled softly. Because being right and being healed aren't the same thing. She nodded, silent. Then, almost shyly, she said, Want to get pancakes? Only if they're thick and slathered in regret. She laughed. Deal. We walked slowly down the courthouse steps, the city buzzing around us, oblivious, alive, unconcerned. The verdict was public now, but the cost? The cost was quiet. It would echo long after the gavel stopped. Still, for the first time in a long time, I felt like the ground beneath me wasn't shifting. It was solid. Ours. Not a gift. Not a favor. Ours. Freedom didn't arrive with a gavel. It arrived in the sound of my own silence. Late winter outside of Seattle is quiet in a way summer never is. The lake behind my new house hadn't frozen completely, but snow clung to the edge of the dock like it still hoped for something solid. I watched it melt a little more each morning, slow, steady, unapologetic. It had been 3 months since the ruling. Claudia had tied up the legal ends with the kind of precision I'd come to admire. Lauren and I had received our equal shares, property, savings, even parts of the hidden holdings we never knew existed. The checks came without fanfare, without apology. Money has a way of being both concrete and empty. We didn't celebrate. Not in the traditional sense. Instead, we opened something else. Lauren had the idea. What if we did something that doesn't just end with us? She'd asked over coffee. Something for girls who never get picked first, who grow up thinking they're supposed to be grateful just to be seen. So we founded a youth literacy fund in our father's name. Small grants, book drives, tutoring stipends. No plaques, no headlines. Just access. Just care. Dad would have liked that. Michael sent a donation a few weeks later. No note. Just a bank transfer marked in honor of the ones who stay. A week after that, a small box arrived. Inside was a watercolor, framed, modest, beautiful. Our childhood home in soft greens and muted blues. The window where I used to sit with a flashlight and a book long after bedtime. The front steps Lauren and I painted yellow one summer without asking. The tree we carved our initials into with a plastic knife when we were 7. There was no signature, but we knew. He's not forgiven, but he's not forgotten either. That was enough. Then came Mom's letter. It was the 3rd one since the verdict. The other 2 had arrived quietly, in thick envelopes addressed in her perfect script. I had let them sit unopened in a drawer. This one was smaller, just 1 page. I almost threw it away. But something made me read the first line. I never thought my daughters would turn on me. I folded the letter before reading the rest. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I placed it gently in the drawer with the others. I didn't tear it. I didn't rage. Because that's the thing about boundaries. They don't require noise to be real. Later that week, I spoke at a women's retreat not far from the lake. The room was small, maybe 30 women, all ages, sipping tea in biodegradable cups. I told the story not in full, but in shape. I talked about how families don't always fracture in fury. Sometimes they fracture in favor, in choices made over and over, while everyone smiles through birthdays and holidays. I said something at the end that had come to me one sleepless night, sitting on the dock in the dark. Being left out doesn't make you less. Sometimes it just makes you free. No one clapped right away, but someone exhaled, a sound like relief. Then another. And then the room filled with soft, steady applause that felt more like an embrace than a celebration. That night, Lauren stayed late. We sat on the porch with blankets wrapped around our legs, watching the moon bounce off the lake in shards of silver. She turned to me and said, "You know, I don't miss the house." I thought about it. I don't either, not the building anyway. What do you miss? Maybe just the version of us that believed we were all in it together. Lauren nodded. I think we still are, just in a different way. Before she left, we stood at the edge of the dock, snow crunching under our boots. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual. No words, just warmth. After she drove away, I opened the drawer and pulled out Dad's notebook. We'd finally gone through it after the ruling, when the legal documents stopped arriving. The pages were full of everyday things, grocery lists, notes about the furnace, scribbled jokes. But on the last page, in his messy all-caps handwriting, was this: "I'm worried Evelyn won't do right by the girls. She still sees Michael as the future. But the girls are the ones who will stay. They're the ones who'll carry the truth." I traced my finger along the words, not to memorize them, but to feel the weight of being seen. Then I set the notebook down and walked outside. The lake was still. The kind of still that makes you whisper without realizing. I stood at the edge of the dock, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle around me. Not as absence, but as presence. Then I said it out loud, soft and certain. I don't owe you my peace. The wind didn't answer. It didn't need to. Some things are final without fanfare. The lake didn't speak, but it listened. And sometimes, in the stillness, that's all healing really needs. I've learned that being cut out of someone's story doesn't mean you vanish. It just means you get to write your own ending. Families are complicated, but truth doesn't have to be loud to be real. Peace isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about choosing what no longer gets to own your heart. If this story reminds you of something unspoken in your own life, I hope you'll share it. Sometimes just being heard is the beginning of being seen,